Well, hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the Sage Innovate power, and I will go through PowerPoint for about 5 or 10 minutes, and then we're going to have a group discussion. So before I get started, just a reminder that everything in this presentation is based on the book Positive Intelligence by Shirzad Chamine, and he has created all the content that we will be going over. And I am a certified positive intelligence coach. So I work with people in the boot camps and one-on-one in coaching to help them embrace all of these concepts and apply them to their lives. So let's dive into Sage Innovate. What is the Sage Innovate power? It's mainly this openness, and the difference between innovate and explore is more of an openness and a curiosity. Innovate is a desire to improve on obvious initial ideas. So it requires kind of an active letting go of the way you're currently looking at something and a real desire to figure out a new approach. And in order to do that, you sort of follow a cycle. And this cycle is followed in businesses throughout when they're trying to come up with ideas, but it also can be applied to you individually in your business life or in your personal life. So there's really two steps. One is to generate a large quantity of ideas in a process where one idea feeds on the one before it. And then you get to step two, where you evaluate and hone in on the ideas. But you want to make sure that you don't start evaluating in the middle of idea generation. And that's actually what typically will shut down the process. And this happens often in business meetings where people start generating ideas, but then they go off on a tangent and they shut down the process without even realizing it. But it also happens in the committee in your own head, where you're generating ideas for yourself and you end up inadvertently shutting down the process by listening to your saboteurs and starting to evaluate while you're generating. One of the things that's really important to understand that helps you stay open to ideas that seem ridiculous or bad to you is what we call the 10% rule. And that is, the other person is always 10% right, or any idea, no matter how crazy it is at least got 10% merit to it. So the saboteur will always focus on what's wrong with the idea and shut down the innovation cycle. But the sage will always look for what's right. And a great example I have is, and this comes from the book Wishcraft from Barbara Sher, and they had a success team and they were talking about ideas, and one of the guys that they were trying to come up with ideas for had no money, but wanted to sail around the world in a yacht. And one of the ideas was, well, you could steal a yacht, right? And so that idea doesn't have any merit on the surface because he wasn't going to steal anything. But what that idea led to is, as soon as someone said, well, you could steal a yacht, he realized maybe he could go on somebody else's yacht. And what he ultimately ended up doing as a result of all the idea generation is getting a job as a tutor to a family's children while they went on a yacht trip around the world. And that way he was able to be on a yacht and go around the world and not have to buy the yacht himself. So no matter what the idea is, no matter how crazy it is, no matter how much you wouldn't do that idea, you want to always look for what's the 10% that is valuable in it. And that requires really training your mind to shut down those saboteurs that are trying to shut down the idea generation process out of fear. So we play the yes and game when we work in Innovate. And that is simply, you come up with any crazy old idea, and then you say, what I like about that idea is, and you just think about what's the 10% that I like, and then you add another idea that's triggered by whatever it was that you've liked. And you can do this individually, although it does work better when you have other brains working with you. So some of the Innovate emotions that we want to identify here are joy, excitement, playfulness, spontaneity. And one of the things that you'll notice from these emotions is that none of them are generated from this feeling like, oh my gosh, this is so hard. This is a terrible problem. We have to figure it out. It's more like, oh, wow, what an interesting challenge. Let's come up with some crazy ideas. Isn't this fun? So it's turning problem solving into a game. And the emotions of that game tend to fuel some really creative ideas and solutions. Now, one of the things that's really important to do is be aware of your saboteurs and how they're going to interfere with the idea generation process. So the judge is always going to direct you to see what's wrong, not what's right about each idea. So even while you're actively looking for the 10% that's right, your judge is going to immediately see, even quicker than you can come up with the 10% that's right, what's wrong. So your judge will notice what's wrong right away, and you'll have to actively and consciously say, what's the 10% that's right? If you have an avoider saboteur, the avoider will kind of scrunch back from any ideas that seem like they would be really challenging or unpleasant, and immediately start coming up with all sorts of reasons why those probably wouldn't be good to pursue right now anyway. The controller tends to narrow the scope of idea generation to not lose control. And what that means is, if you think about ideas that involve letting everybody handle something. So for example, if you think about Wikipedia or Linux operating system, sort of this crowdsourcing type of solutions that came up to online encyclopedia and creating really great products, a controller saboteur would hate those ideas and kind of, bat them down without regard, because there's no way to control what everybody else is going to do. So the controller wouldn't even think of an idea like that. And if an idea is brought up, they would immediately feel threatened by that. The hyperachiever tends to narrow the scope of an idea generation to existing achievement targets. So they automatically, out of hand, sort of reject any ideas that don't seem productive on the surface, that seem like a waste of time. A great example of that is consciously going slower, right? Or everybody sitting around and going out to lunch and having a good time, as opposed to doing something that seems kind of tangibly productive. The hyper-rational, again, will out of hand sort of reject any ideas that don't seem logical or rational. So if you think of something crazy like stealing a boat, or doing something that doesn't seem like it's even achievable, the hyper-rational will immediately go, well, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. So why is it even on the table? The hypervigilant is going to be threatened by any kind of innovation that introduces more risks and anxiety. So anything that brings more risk into the picture, that just dials up the anxiety with someone who has a hypervigilant saboteur, and makes them more scared and more anxious. And it turns the process into something very anxiety provoking. So coming up with those kinds of ideas are very threatening, and they don't even want to deal with them. The pleaser tends to suppress their own desire for innovation because they're worried that their ideas might hurt somebody else's feelings. So they've got a sort of a filter on anything that they want to blurt out. They're very careful about not blurting it out in case it might, in some way, shape, or form, offend somebody else. And that really stifles their ability to come up with creative ideas. Restless tends to pursue the next exciting idea rather than systematically generating ideas and then honing into the best and sticking with it. So restless has a hard time sticking with one idea, and they might like latch onto one idea that feels really good to them and take the first few steps, then get bored and change their mind as another good idea comes up. And that makes it hard for the restless to use this process, because they start feeling stifled if they have to choose something and stick to it. The stickler tends to narrow idea generation down through this idea to know more details. Like, how is that going to work? If you're thinking about stealing a boat, then like, how would you even do that? Like, without getting caught? And they start thinking about those things. Like, What are the steps involved with that idea? And it's very hard for the stickler saboteur to allow an idea to be on the table without knowing all the steps of how that would work. But that's not important, since 90% of the ideas in these idea generation activities are actually going to be rejected. So you don't need to know the details. And the victim tends to sort of diminish the enthusiasm and the excitement around the yes and game. So the victim pretty much assumes it's not going to work, that none of the ideas are really going to be viable before even engaging in the game. So these are the things that you want to look out for. If you've got a couple of these that are louder than the rest, you want to make sure that you are prepared to nip them in the bud so that you can really enjoy the innovation process. So how would you use Innovate? Let's say you wanted to practice right now. Well, one thing you want to do is pay attention to things that might be feeling hard for you. Because really, anything that you do from Sage mode follows the path of ease and flow. It's fun, it's exciting, positive emotions. So even if something takes a lot of effort, it really isn't hard. And I'll give you an example. So when I practice piano, a lot of times I avoid it because it feels hard to me. But I've used the Innovate game to come up with ways to make my practice sessions easier. And those go from practicing for 5 minutes to something I came up with that really worked well for me, which is doing a couple of scales and things that I know really, really well to start off with. So I'm sitting at the piano and doing those things and feeling confident before trying to launch into playing a new piece that is going to actually feel harder. And once I'm already sitting on the piano and I'm already doing things, I'm much more willing to take it to the next step. So I have a routine of how I start my practice sessions that makes it really easy and gets me into ease and flow. And I got into that by really thinking and innovating and coming up with new ideas, because I found that I was continuing to blow off my piano practice. So that's when you're having a hard time with something. What about when you're having a hard time with someone? So let's say that you're in conflict with your spouse or someone who's important to you, maybe a partner at work, and they're just driving you nuts. One of the things that can really help is challenging yourself to always see the 10% truth in the other person's perspective. So even if they're just talking crazy and they make no sense at all, doing this, what is the 10% truth, honing in on that, and then acknowledging that 10% and then doing a yes and can really help you. And if you're trying to figure something else on your own and you don't have a group of friends to do it with, doing it with your coach, practicing the yes and game with your coach or practicing it with a good friend can always help, because it gets another brain involved. One of the things I love about this yes and game, I know during the elections, I was really thinking that we should have yes and debates. So the debate should be, yes, I like this about your idea, and this is my perspective that's different. So I was thinking those would be really interesting debates to listen to, other than the way that they're currently formatted. Okay, so I think I've already said that if something is feeling hard, that's your cue to start using the Innovate power, because the path of Sage is always the path of ease and flow. So the question is, how could this be easier? If your mind is telling you this is just a hard thing and there's nothing about it that could be easier, then you want to ask yourself, what are the saboteurs that are coming into play here? What are they telling me that is insisting that this has to be hard? And when you seem like you're locked in conflict with another person, again, really take into consideration, what is that 10% that's the truth in what they're saying? Okay, using the power of a group. So a lot of times what I like to do is play the yes and game with a group. And sort of a standard way to play it is to have one person generate an idea and the next person say, yes, what I like about that idea, and this is another idea that was triggered by it. But another way that you can do this in a group exponentially is you can have each person in the group write as many ideas as they can on individual Post-its, one idea per Post-it. And as each idea is posted, have everyone in the group write additional ideas that are triggered by the idea. So this is what I call the yes and game on steroids. So let's say everyone in the room writes 5 good ideas for a problem that you're trying to solve. Then each person reads off one of their ideas, and then everybody's challenged to write at least one new idea based on the idea that they just wrote. And so then you end up having not only a couple of ideas from each person, but you end up having tons and tons of ideas. It's a very fun way to generate ideas very quickly. Okay, so I'm going to be stopping the recording, and we are going to work in a group and practice the yes and game. For those of you who are watching this as a recording, keep in mind that you can always reach out to me, and I can answer any questions you have, or you can send me an email and I can answer questions that way, or we can address any issues you're having on a coaching call. All right, goodbye for now.